The pain of losing my father-in-law was already unbearable. But what transpired next only added to the heartache. Conor, my husband, uttered words that seemed surreal, leaving me frozen in shock. "Let's get divorced. I got the inheritance, so I don't need you as my human ATM anymore," he callously declared. In that bewildering moment, I struggled to comprehend Conor's unexpected statement. "What do you mean?" I questioned him, desperately seeking an explanation. Conor, wearing a smug grin, seemed all too eager to clarify. "I received about 1.1 billion from Dad's inheritance. I don't need you anymore," he declared, continuing to express his dissatisfaction with our marriage. "You have no idea how uncomfortable I've been. I expected someone exciting, a match made by Dad, not someone like you. What a disappointment." Stunned by his words, I couldn't hold back my inquiry. "Then why did you marry me? You could have just said no." Conor's response was as callous as it was revealing. "Isn't it obvious? For the money. Who else would marry someone like you?" Unable to remain silent any longer, I reluctantly handed him the divorce papers. I chose to agree to the divorce without divulging certain truths, knowing he would come to regret his decisions later. My name is Lily, 42 years old, running an apparel company. I married Conor, 2 years my junior, through an arranged meeting facilitated by President Jackson, Conor's father. Despite Conor's initial consideration as the successor, his lack of interest and competence led to his removal from the list, relegating him to a regular position within the company. What initially drew me to Conor's was his easygoing nature, a quality that appealed to me since my youth. Those around me often labeled me as meticulous and serious, and while I received praise for my dedication to studying, the flip side was that I was sometimes avoided for appearing too rigid. Past relationships brought a recurring criticism. I wasn't charming enough. It felt like dating a boss rather than a girlfriend. The revelation was startling, and I couldn't help but consider the possibility that I was indeed too serious. Laughter at my perceived inflexibility became a common occurrence. I grappled with the challenge of doing things half-heartedly, as I tended to immerse myself completely in whatever I pursued. Conor, on the other hand, seemed to belong to a different world. Our first date added a twist to my expectations. Conor, quite unexpectedly, chose a closed restaurant for our rendezvous. While I would have panicked in such a situation, Conor effortlessly suggested an alternative nearby diner, demonstrating a flexibility that was alien to me. His adaptability was an eye-opener, making me believe that being with him could foster a more spontaneous side in me. Consequently, I decided to marry Conor. Surprisingly, those around me were opposed to the idea. Whispers of advice reached my ears, with some suggesting there were better matches for me. Even Jackson, who would become my father-in-law, lacked enthusiasm. He questioned my decision, expressing concern as if he were pushing his son onto me. Back then, I dismissed their reservations, convinced that they failed to grasp Conor's greatness. However, reality struck immediately after our marriage. Conor abruptly quit his job without consulting anyone, offering a casual response when questioned by a worried Jackson. "Why work when Lily is earning?" Both Jackson and I were left speechless and appalled at Conor's revelation. Why would he willingly shift the entire responsibility of earning onto me, despite numerous attempts by Jackson and me to persuade him otherwise? Conor remained steadfast in his decision, nonchalantly stating, "Why bother working when I can't earn as much as Lily anyway?" Conor's declaration of becoming a stay-at-home husband fueled an immediate desire for divorce. If he were in his 20s, perhaps I might have found his actions cute, but the sight of a man throwing a tantrum in front of me, nearing the age of 40, was far from endearing. Eventually, we reluctantly settled on an arrangement where he would take care of household chores. Conor's parents had divorced a few years ago, with Conor's mother reportedly lacking proficiency in household chores. According to Conor, she couldn't do anything, so I never learned. He seemed to make excuses, attributing his inability to handle household chores to his mother's supposed shortcomings. Initially inept at housework, Conor gradually improved after patient teaching and praise. However, his competence didn't translate to excellence, and there was still much left to be desired. Despite this, he displayed a sense of satisfaction, crediting himself with the house's upkeep. Thanks to me taking care of the house, Lily can work. Be grateful, he would assert confidently. There was something mildly irritating about the confident look on Conor's face. Not wanting to jeopardize everything by saying the wrong thing, I forced a smile and responded, "Yes, I'm really grateful for your help, Conor." There were moments of irritation, but overall, we seemed to be living together reasonably well. About a year into our marriage, a significant turning point occurred when Jackson adopted a 9-year-old boy named Andy. Andy seemed like an ordinary boy, and Jackson, a man with a purpose behind his actions, adopted him seemingly out of the blue. I couldn't help but question Jackson's motives when we were alone. "It's a secret," he replied, and proceeded to explain that Andy was the child of one of his subordinates whom he adored like his own. Jackson, with close family ties to Andy's parents, had cared for him like a grandchild. Recently, Andy's parents had tragically passed away in an accident. Since they had married without close relatives, Andy was left without a support system. Uncertain of Andy's happiness in our household, I expressed my concerns to Jackson. "I don't know if Andy will be happy with me, but if he wants to stay, I want to be with him." Understanding the potential difficulties that Andy would face if not adopted, I made the decision to bring him into our family. Without the adoption, Andy would have ended up in a facility, and that was something I couldn't bear. When I shared this decision with Jackson, he smiled and remarked, "That's very much like you." He reassured me of our shared freedom without children and urged me not to hesitate if I needed help. As I began taking care of Andy, particularly on nights when Jackson couldn't be home due to work or other commitments, he gradually warmed up to me. Although initially nervous, Andy's sociable nature, or perhaps his way of fitting in, made the experience quite rewarding. On the contrary, Conor didn't share my enthusiasm about this situation. It was evident that he wasn't welcoming towards Andy from the start. I could understand the confusion a father adopting an unknown child might bring, but when I attempted to discuss it with Conor, his concern focused on one point: the potential decrease in his share of the inheritance. Conor's reaction was unexpected, and I couldn't believe my ears when he said, "What's he thinking?" "My share of the inheritance will decrease now. I thought I'd have it all to myself." Conor's complex feelings towards Andy were not about the adoption itself. He was solely worried about his financial stake. Determined to address this concern, he declared, "I'm going to talk to Dad about this. I'm not okay with it." Upon returning home after the confrontation, Conor surprisingly seemed to be in a very good mood. Cautiously, I inquired about the outcome, to which he casually replied, "Oh, it's fine. My share won't change." Puzzled, I questioned further, expecting an explanation about equal inheritance rights for adopted children. However, Conor explained, looking quite pleased with himself, "Dad's making Andy renounce his inheritance rights. Makes sense, right?" As the only son of Jackson, I found it difficult to believe that he, who had spoken so lovingly of Andy, would plan to leave him with nothing. Something about the situation felt off, and I couldn't shake my doubts. However, Conor seemed relieved, saying, "That's a relief. Well, if Jackson says so, there must be some reason behind it. Anyway, Jackson is still in his 60s. Inheritance shouldn't be a concern for a while." Casually, I pondered the likelihood of divorcing Conor before my father-in-law passed away. Little did I know that my casual musings would turn into a harsh reality much sooner than expected. A year later, Jackson was involved in an accident and tragically passed away. The reality of bidding farewell to a man I had known longer than Conor hit me hard. Jackson was someone I respected both professionally and personally. Upon hearing the news, grief overwhelmed me, and tears flowed uncontrollably. Despite the heavy eyes and pounding headache from crying too much, I forced myself to work through the pain to prepare for the funeral. Conor, as the chief mourner, did not seem to grieve. He appeared lost in thought, and it became apparent that the sudden loss of his father was too shocking for him to grasp. Taking charge of the funeral arrangements fell on me, as Conor seemed unable to navigate through the emotional turmoil that accompanied his father's unexpected passing. "I can't believe it. You're heartless. Say whatever you want." I wanted to walk away right then, but before I did, there was something I had to tell Conor. It was about Andy. With his father gone, I had asked Conor to temporarily keep Andy with us. Without other arrangements, Andy would end up in a facility. I had decided that I wanted to raise Andy myself. "Oh, you're taking him in. That's fine by me." Conor's easy agreement surprised me, but he continued with a smile, "Because whatever you decide, it doesn't matter to me anymore." Confused, I asked why. Conor held up a piece of paper, a divorce form. "Let's get divorced. Now that I've got the inheritance, I don't need you, my human ATM, anymore." Ha! For a moment, I couldn't understand what Conor was saying. Did he just refer to me as an ATM and say I was no longer needed? "What do you mean?" I asked him again. Conor, grinning smugly, explained proudly, "I got about 1.1 billion from Dad's inheritance, so I don't need you anymore. With this much money, I don't need to work anymore. No need to keep you happy. No more bothering with tedious household chores. Oh, how lucky I am." With exaggerated gestures, Conor expressed his joy. Watching him, I was deeply shocked. The inheritance was money coming in because of his father's death, yet he was acting as if he had won the lottery. I had felt it before, but now it was clear. Conor showed no signs of mourning his father or feeling sad. He was genuinely thrilled. But money is a frightening thing. It's not unusual for someone to change completely after getting a large sum. Perhaps Conor was just overwhelmed by the sudden wealth. "Calm down, Conor. Let's talk about this first," I said, placing my hand on Conor's shoulder. He quickly shook it off and yelled angrily, "Shut up, you uptight woman." "Uptight? I married you because Dad introduced me, and you were a female CEO. I've always felt suffocated with you. It's been hard." Conor continued to express his dissatisfaction with me. Do you know how constricted I felt? I was expecting someone exciting because it was a match made by Dad. But then you showed up, so plain and boring. What a disappointment. He could have just refused the arranged marriage. I didn't force him, nor did I aggressively pursue him. Being portrayed as the victim was unfair. Then, with a mocking laugh, Conor revealed a shocking fact prefaced with, "It was a long time ago, so I'll be honest." He admitted to having a significant amount of debt. "You know what Dad said. If I married you and devoted myself to you, he would pay it off in return. So of course I had to marry you." Conor never loved me or anything like that from the start. He just married me for the money. Well, it wasn't fun, but thanks to you, here I am. Thanks for that. Watching Conor laugh coarsely, I made up my mind. I don't need to know such a person anymore. I swallowed the last piece of advice I thought to give him, and then I started filling out the divorce form without hesitation. I was surprised at how quickly and decisively I was able to write. Conor, who had been rushing me for the divorce, seemed a bit surprised too. "What, you decided to divorce? Fine. Here, the divorce papers." After finishing, I even felt a sense of accomplishment. With this, you and I are strangers no more. Connections, yeah, now we're free. You can live with that kid, and I can have fun with young women. Conor was ecstatic. From what I saw of him, he'd have been faithful during the marriage. I never suspected it. But as far as that goes, I am impressed. But if you're this happy, you should have divorced me sooner. Couldn't help it. I wanted the money. Conor carelessly stuffed the divorce papers into his bag and hurriedly left our home. Continuing to live in the house I shared with Conor felt wrong. I decided it was time for a fresh start and to sell the house. Ideally, I wanted to live near my parents' home. It would be helpful for both Andy and me. Andy would have to change schools, but he was okay with it, saying, "It's fine," a bit sad. But this made it easier to look for a new place without worry. Finding a property was challenging, but I finally made a decision. The main factors were the proximity to my parents' home and the location's convenience. It was expensive, but considering Andy, it seemed perfect. Andy was thrilled during the house viewing, exclaiming, "Wow, a mansion!" The house had plenty of space and intricate interiors. Surprisingly, it even had a pool, not necessary for me, but Andy was excited about it. Wow, amazing. Any house would have been fine for just me. But I was happy to see him pleased, and so we moved. It took some time for both of us to get used to the new place, but gradually it became a haven of peace. Around that time, I received a message from Conor. He seemed desperate, saying, "I want to meet and apologize right away." I had a good idea why he suddenly wanted to apologize. After leaving Andy with my mother, I headed to the family restaurant I had specified. Conor had arrived before me and was sitting in a corner booth, looking pale and on the verge of tears. "Lily," he stood up as soon as he saw me. But I looked at him coldly. "What do you want? We're strangers now, remember?" "Don't say that. Actually, Dad had debts. Damn it, I never imagined Dad would be in debt." "So what? You inherited 1.1 billion. Didn't he just pay it off with that?" "Well, that's the thing. The debts are more than the inheritance. Apparently, the debts exceeded the 1.1 billion. Conor, having inherited both the estate and the liabilities, was now saddled with debt. I didn't know I'd inherit the debts too. Conor's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Please, Lily, you must have some savings, right? We were married once. Help me out." Conor was imploring with a fawning smile. Did he forget what he had said after mocking me and calling me an ATM? Now he expects help. It's unbelievable. He even dared to contact me. Moreover, he said he wanted to apologize over the phone. But he hasn't uttered a single word of apology. After how much you hated our marriage, regretting it and all, how can you even ask me for help now? That was, well, I didn't expect things to turn out like this. His honesty was astounding. It was as if he was admitting he only turned to me for money again because he needed it. "Unfortunately, I can't meet your expectations. I don't have any money." "What? No way, that's impossible." "I know your company is thriving, you liar." It's frustrating how he blames me for his own problems. "I'm not lying. I just don't have money to lend you. ATMs don't just lend to anyone, especially not when there's no chance of getting the money back." Conor seemed to remember his own harsh words from before, his face showing a hint of embarrassment. Yet he still didn't apologize, showing an oddly high level of pride. "What's with you? You're so cold. Don't you care what happens to me?" "Oh, have you forgotten what you said when we divorced? Once we divorce, we're strangers. Whatever happens to each other is no longer our concern." Weren't those your words? It's baffling how he can act like a victim. How thick-skinned can he be? Does he have some ability to forget anything that's inconvenient for him? Maybe I said something like that, but it wasn't really how I felt. I never thought things would turn out like this. Conor leaned on the table, looking downcast. "I even thought about life insurance, but the lawyer said I'm not the beneficiary." "Oh, really? Haha." My laughter and response made Conor look at me wide-eyed. "Don't tell me, Lily. Dad left it to you?" "No, not me." "Then why are you laughing?" "I just felt a bit sorry for you. With life insurance, unlike inheritance, you wouldn't have had to take on the debt. Indeed, that's why Jackson had Andy renounce the inheritance. He left something for Andy in a different way, through life insurance. The beneficiary of Jackson's life insurance was Andy." "Is that all you wanted to talk about? If so, I'm leaving. There's nothing I can do for you." "Wait, please. What about starting over? Back then, I was just upset about Dad, and I do care about you, Lily. You only cared about the money, right?" I knew Conor was denying and saying all sorts of things, but I was not going to be fooled again. Besides, I no longer had any money to give to such a person. "Well, I have someone important waiting for me at home." I left the family restaurant, hearing Conor's cries of despair behind me. They were just noise to me now. I needed to get back quickly. Andy might be hungry, or perhaps my mother gave him something to eat. I hurried towards the station. As for Connor, I heard he's been working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts. With no work experience, qualifications, or motivation, it seems he couldn't land a full-time position anywhere. Once on my way to a meeting, I spotted him working at a convenience store. He looked older and much more worn out than before. The consequences of living off others' money had finally caught up to him. I felt no sympathy for him. Meanwhile,